will go wrong, people will make mistakes, people will miss stuff, is really, really key. The case when you're leading a transformation program, it's a complex, fast-moving environment. No one has a monopoly on knowledge. No one has a monopoly on good insight and understanding everything. So you need as many people to contribute and provide their view as possible. And therefore you need to lay the foundations that encourages them, and the cultural environment that encourages people to speak up, raise concerns, challenge assumptions.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of me and Paul discuss the power of setting up for ERP transformations for success. The aspect that we'll be exploring is psychological safety, a very important but a forgotten aspect. So Paul has an interesting history. I'll let Paul introduce himself and explain the importance of psychological safety. And Paul, welcome to this group. And Paul, you've got a very colorful experience and a history in setting up teams. So over to you for a quick introduction.
Yeah, well, thanks, Judith. Really good to talk to you today. So yeah, my background, as you probably see from the picture behind me, so I was a pilot in the Royal Air Force back in the United Kingdom for about 15 years. Joined straight after university and had a really incredible experience, not only operating in a number of very challenging environments around the world, but leading teams as the aircraft captain through those challenging environments, but also involved in some strategy planning roles as well. So I really enjoyed that and had a fantastic career. But when I came to the end of my career, I actually moved away from the cockpit and decided actually I wanted to go more into those strategy planning type jobs that I quite enjoyed when I was doing in the military. So then I moved into corporate world. So for about the last 10 years, I've been working in predominantly financial services, but not exclusively. I've worked across a number of industries, leading large transformation programs, be it restructures, mergers, consolidations, new operating models, things like that. So that's been great. And I think many of the principles I've learned from both my time in the military and in aviation are often very applicable to corporate world. And as you said, psychological safety is absolutely one of those.
And thank you, Paul. And that's wonderful. So, transformation, as we work on this, and as professionals, as we work on transformation, we know the world around us is changing, and there is a lot of fluidity that happens with our roles, and as with any transformation program. So, how important, in your perspective, is to make sure we are setting things up for success? For setting things up for success, how important is psychological safety, especially in large teams?
Yes. Well, I think in any team it's critical. I think yes, it is about success, and it is about making sure that the structures and everything you're doing from a fairly foundational level in terms of setting up the team and in terms of establishing what you want to achieve through the transformation. So there's a lot of clarity required in terms of clear outcomes, clear business case, clear processes to follow. But at the same time, I think it's recognizing that while you are setting up for success, that things go wrong, right? There is not really, particularly in the modern office environment and the modern workplace, things are increasingly complex, increasingly intertwined. Human beings are complex. And transformation is ultimately about working with human beings. And so understanding that things will go wrong, people will make mistakes, people will miss stuff, is really, really key. So the irony is obviously yes, you're targeting success, but understanding that at the same time, things will go wrong, and putting the foundations in place to make sure that you not only capture when things go wrong, you understand when things go wrong, but also what you can learn and then move forward. And so it is only by recognizing that it will happen or people will commit error that actually laying those foundations for success. So psychological safety is very much about creating that environment where people feel comfortable to speak up. And it's really threefold. It's not only are they comfortable to speak up, to put their hand up and say, look, I think I've done something wrong, or I think I've missed something. It's then secondary about actually challenging as well. So it's having people not only feeling comfortable to speak up, but also comfortable in raising concerns or challenging assumptions, or saying that actually something doesn't feel right? Something we've done or a decision we've made, maybe they disagree with. And then finally, from the leader or the organization's perspective, it's actually about listening to that person as well. So it's all well and good having someone speak up or someone, raise their hand, but it's the response, responding in the right way. So if someone is raising a concern, actually taking on board what they've said. If someone's challenging an assumption, understanding why they're challenging it and what it is that they're trying to articulate, what they're worried about, and then responding to that appropriately by maybe reassessing or taking on board those concerns. Or if they've admitted a mistake, by not punishing them. Because if you don't do if you don't respond in the appropriate way, it just drives fear, and it drives those behaviors underground. And so therefore people are less likely to speak up and admit mistakes, or they're less likely to raise concerns. So it's the environment, and particularly in complex, fast moving environments, which, as I've said, my background has been in. And to be honest, it's increasingly the case when you're leading a transformation program. It's a complex, fast moving environment. No one has a monopoly on knowledge. No one has a monopoly on good insight and understanding everything. So you need as many people to contribute and provide their view as possible. And therefore you need to lay the foundations that encourages them, and the cultural environment that encourages people to speak up, raise concerns, challenge assumptions.
And that's beautiful, isn't it? So with transformation, as you rightly touched, no one knows all the answers. There is lots of moving parts that all of us are work with, and sometimes we are solving puzzles that no one knows what we are solving. So it's just about being open and working with it, and not being very rigid with any of the thoughts or processes or approach, and having the environment to do that. And history has proven that fear is not a good motivator, or fearful teams are not contributing teams. And also, psychological safety sometimes, as when we chat, we talk about, there is a different notion to it, and this is purely about everyone feeling safe to be able to contribute and work towards a common goal. And thank you for that. And the other one, the flip side of it is, we have all seen things when people seen what happens when people don't feel safe. So, and history, and especially your experience, you would have seen a lot of things on how people behave, or whatever happens when people don't necessarily feel safe. Is there anything that we can talk about in terms of relating to that experience and picking up a few points when those behaviors are seen?
Yes, and it's a great point that obviously having a psychological safe culture in the workplace is quite aspirational, and some organizations have that. But even organizations, as I said, the origins of psychological safety is actually quite long, and really originated in two strands. One was from sort of workplace behavioral psychology and some of the work that was done in the 1960s. But some of the practical application actually came from aviation and the work that was done in aviation. And so aviation has, been doing this for 40 years and really refining the processes and the culture within those environments 40 years, but they still get it wrong, right? There are still companies within aviation, Boeing recently have had a lot of problems where people have been putting their hand up to raise concerns and have not been listened to. And there are even, aircraft accidents that have happened in the last decade where when they play back the black box recording of what took place on the flight deck, those behaviors where, the captain was overruling other members of the crew, not listening to them, have crept in. And this is despite this being really, the lifeblood of the aviation industry, to create that environment, because you're dealing with people's lives, you're dealing with safety, ultimately, that a condition of psychological safety creates physical safety. And that's why those lessons from aviation have now started to roll out across medicine, across oil and gas, across utilities, a number of other industries where, but if things go wrong, people's lives are potentially at risk. So creating the environment of psychological safety where people feel empowered to speak up, raise concerns, admit when they've made a mistake is really, really critical. So if you are in an environment where that culture doesn't happen, and where people are scared of putting their hand up because they think, if I admit a mistake, I could lose my job, I could get penalized, I could get punished. It is challenging. I think as a leader, or, if you're when I run a program, I've gone into organizations where the culture has been a little bit toxic and people have not felt safe. And all I could do as the leader was just try to create the conditions within my team to protect my team from some of the politics and the toxicity that was coming from above, and create the conditions where they felt comfortable and safe. And then I had to act as the filter, right? And it was quite demanding on me to be in that position, because then I had to really take full accountability for what everybody did, and make sure that I was fronting up to senior leaders, and I was really the face of the program, but I was able to protect the team and so create conditions of safety for them. That's hard, right? And there's no illusions that that's quite hard, because it puts a lot of pressure on the individual and it puts pressure on the team leader. All you can do is the right thing, right? I think there are,
Absolutely.
yeah, definitely. And you look at those organizations that have had, have ended up on the front page of newspapers because things have gone wrong, like the Volkswagen emission scandal. There have been documented cases where some of the engineers involved in that raised concerns and said, this is wrong, this doesn't feel right, and they were ignored and overruled. But the company ultimately ended up on the front page of the paper. So anybody who's struggling in this environment, my full sympathy to you, because it is hard being working in a culture where that environment doesn't exist. But actually, I would always say to people, look back, think about yourself in 5-10 years time. What would you say to yourself now? Would you look back and be proud that you tried to do the right thing? You tried to raise concerns, even though you knew perhaps you may not be listened to. You tried to protect your team, even though that was putting a lot of pressure on you. You tried to, protect people if they made mistakes, and actually create a genuine learning environment and not punish people for making mistakes, even though the organizational trend may be against that, or the organizational culture may be against that. In 5-10 years time, you want to look back on what you've done with pride, and even though it takes courage, I think you can look back with pride on your behaviors now. So doing the right thing is always much better than doing the easy thing. And that's a good mantra, I think, for psychological safety, because it is about speaking up, it is about challenging, it is about making sure that people feel safe to raise concerns. And sometimes those conversations are difficult. There's a mythology that psychological safety is about everybody just being nice to each other and getting along. That is not the case. It is actually about
It is tough.
disagreement. It's
Yeah,
an environment where people can have healthy disagreement with each other.
absolutely right. So, and relating to the recent transformation experiences, or when I say recent, in the last 20 years, when we look at transformations, and especially the ones that most of us end up rescuing or mitigating, we look at what has been documented, and it's very clear that the teams weren't either feeling safe, or the concerns wasn't addressed, or
Yeah.
something in between. And this is something probably a very simple solution when we set up transformations. So ensure safety. We are all working in an unknown environment, and the world we know in transformation is changing, and no one has all the answers. So all we can do is create a team of safety. So we are all reporting, or we are all working, happy to work with the unknown, and happy to work with what we have got. And when something doesn't feel right, we have the courage to speak up and say, it doesn't feel right. What can we do about it? And we can address it together. And
Yes.
that brings us to something that we all can do as sponsors, as vendors, as participants, as anyone working in a transformation environment. Something that we can all do to ensure our safety, the safety of the transformation program, and those around us. How do we ensure that have a in all of us acknowledge we have a responsibility, that uh, we do the right thing? And the right thing doesn't necessarily mean it's the easy thing to do, and sometimes we have tough conversations, but we all have an obligation towards us and towards each other to make things a success. From your
Yes.
experience, is there something we all can do, irrespective of the roles we play, something as leaders or participants or even as sponsors? What can we do to
Yeah.
ensure success?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think when you're a sponsor, or you're in a senior leadership position, it's always worth remembering that 99% of people come to work to do a good job, right? And actually, if things don't go so well, you don't have to jump up and down on them. They're going to be disappointed in themselves as much as anybody else, right? If they miss something, if something goes wrong. But also, you have to be very careful that, and particularly in transformation programs of the watermelon reporting,
Mm.
and just ensuring that you give the confidence and you give enough empowerment to the team to understand that transparency, reflecting reality is much, much more important than artificial progress, right? I think everybody understands when we're working on transformation programs, there's a lot of pressure. Budgets are tight, people are on tight timelines, there's a lot of stuff we need to get done. But as I said, things go wrong. So as a sponsor, you need to recognize that things will go wrong, right? Uh, Timelines may get hit, or resources may leave, or whatever it is, right? That happens. Mistakes will happen, things will get missed. Making sure that the team understand that that's okay, right? Obviously, you're not trying to encourage failure, you're not trying to encourage poor performance, but what you are saying is, I recognize you're doing your best. I recognize that you are going to work really hard to achieve these outcomes, and these are the things I want to put in place to support you to achieve those outcomes. But if anything goes wrong, we need to know about it early, right? And obviously, having the channels and the forums to escalate risks and issues early should be fairly standard for most program delivery teams. But so I think engage sponsors who can interact closely with the delivery teams, understand what those risks and issues are before they pop up in a report that's read, and making sure that the entire team feel comfortable with full transparency, full honesty, full visibility, right? And you're not there to solve the problems, right? Some of them are very, very technical problems and they'll be technical experts, but just being aware that the problems exist, being aware what the impacts are going to be, and understanding that, what pressures this is placing on the team is going to be key, right? So when the report comes up red, you understand and it's not a surprise. Similarly, if you're a project manager or a program manager or anybody compiling doing that reporting and working with a stakeholder, just be fully transparent with them and just making sure that you give them the confidence that you understand what the issues are, you understand what the risks are, and then potentially how they're going to play out. And so you can work on that two-way dynamic. It has to be a very, very close relationship between the sponsor and whoever's in charge of delivery, and making sure that you've got full trust between each other. You fully understand what the risks are. You fully understand how issues potentially will impact the work that's being done. And then, that in itself is how what we would all understand as nuts and bolts of project and program delivery really overlaps with psychological safety. And this is where I sometimes worry that psychological safety turns into a bit of a buzzword and people don't really understand what it is. But everything I just described, which is really basic project management principles, actually is creating the environment of psychological safety. It's about transparency, it's about trust, it's about honesty, and creating the conditions for people to feel comfortable to report in that way.
Absolutely. And when we look at the history, the teams that have been successful are the teams that have been safer or feeling safer. And they were the
Yeah.
ones who have reported a lot of problems and solved those problems or worked on it together. And also, there is a story of when a person reported a defeat, and the king looked at the general and said, "And thank you, and you saved us from a bigger failure." So that is an example of a good sponsor. So sometimes, we look at the bigger perspective and say, what has this taught us, and where is this leading us? So none of us know all the information. It's about working with what is available and working with who we have got, and together we are
Yes.
creating a better world. So that's a great thing. And thank you for sharing this beautiful thing, Paul. And together, I'm sure all of us make a better world through business transformation. And thank you, everyone, for listening. And Paul and I will meet for a different episode at a different point in time. We look forward to sharing more. Thank you.